I apologize for it taking so long for us to do a follow-up video. We've been quite busy, and we've had a lot going on.
There's much to share on our progress, and we've been documenting as we go. However, getting a working farm up and running and all the work we need to do on our home has been very time-consuming, and a lot of hard work. The videos are done to share and inspire, however our goal is not getting the most subscribers or even profit. This is why we don't ask you to subscribe, but we will encourage you to share so others can be inspired. We are simply a small group of people who care about humanity and wish to do what is right in a humble way. We hope what we share inspires you to become more independent and community-minded. We must lead ourselves. When we last left off on Peace Orchards, we had begun getting the basics in place like electric and heat. I tried to talk my husband into not going the traditional route for electric and just go off-grid. Being used to conveniences, he wanted to start off with traditional first. It became a massive project. The previous owner had built the home under electrical wires, and this needed to be corrected. We had to pay to have ditches dug for underground wires. Remember, there was no electric here, which I thought was the perfect opportunity to just go off-grid. It became a long ordeal, and it cost us a great deal of money. For less than what we had spent on traditional electric, we could have already been off-grid. However, I did start to squirrel away ways to be off-grid and still have some conveniences, as we did live off-grid with no electric for a while, and we know we can do it. I also looked into an innovation that is a must for any new building or even an off-grid home, and I'd love to get them for our home. They're called solar tunnels, and they are brilliant. They install these in the ceiling, and it removes the need for traditional lighting. They use the sun's light during the day and at night. They use the energy they stored from the day. They're completely off-grid and recycle the energy from the sun. They make them for every type of roof, even a pole barn like ours. Clean Energy Summit does a good job of reviewing different models for homes. You can find the article on free energy at summit.org for more information. Also, our son has begun training on horses by friends that live close by, and they're working with him to get him used to taking care of animals' needs.
There you go. Good job. Yeah, that's it. Right here.
Spring and summer had finally come in our first year here in 2021, and we began working on the orchard and planting trees and berry bushes. Anything that could produce food was an option. Nut trees were also important, especially since we are vegetarian. We did lose some trees the first year, and they will need replaced. We also started saving and planting seeds from citrus and fruit trees to begin growing our own for the expansion of the orchards. I had to do some adjusting to the soil here, as we had really nice black dirt that never seemed to need fertilized in our old state. Here the soil is more red and contains some clay, depending on where you're at. Getting a soil tester would be a good idea if you move to a new location and are not familiar with the soil needs or are beginning the growing process. We had a new visitor on the farm, Sparling. Sparling was a bird who insisted in coming in our home through the stove chimney. I would set him free, to only have him return and want to hang out with us again. I began to be concerned for when winter came and how he might get cooked in our chimney once we began to use it. I had to decide what to do about him. Either we would need to have a cage, or he would need to be free and not return. I would let him decide, but I could not allow him to be cooked in our chimney. While this game of coming inside and watching us and even allowing us to hold him went on for a while, I knew I had to make him decide. I made a large cage for him and waited for him to return. When he did, I put him inside, and boy was he upset. He wanted out. I saw this as a good sign, and I hoped that while we loved having him, his safety would be our first priority. So this caging, as it were, was enough to break the habit of him coming inside. I was relieved when I took him outside, and he seemed to say, "I'm out of here." When I released him, he never returned to our chimney. I saw this as a good compromise to keep him safe from what he did not understand would be his demise. Perhaps he thought we had been cruel and kidnapped him, but in reality it was a catalyst for him to move on and be safe from a painful end. We wish him well and hope he is off with a family of his own in nature. Isn't it interesting how some of us are experiencing something similar to Sparling? Life has become dangerous. There are many things going on in this world, and we have to decide, do we want to live in a cage, or do we want to be free and leave the old system behind? Sparling sure did a great job of explaining this to us. Sparling sure was a great example in this respect. My husband signed me up to be a foster mom for the local shelter, and we brought home 2 young kittens. We had them for about a month, and my son was thrilled to have them. This was also great practice for him. They were returned to the shelter due to one of them having a health issue and us needing to travel to see a relative. I have also noticed, in the past, all plants could handle the sun and thrived. In the last decade or so, some plants have done better with more shade as they try to adjust. This may have something to do with the changes to the balance between the magnetosphere, the Schumann resonance, and the Van Allen belts. Our environment is changing, and just like plants, we too are seeing changes in our own consciousness. We had a greenhouse frame, and we got to work getting it covered with greenhouse poly covering. We would get it covered in time for winter. The frame measured 20 feet by 13.5 feet wide. The tarp cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $500, and we bought the commercial grade so it would last. We would get it covered in time for winter and then worry about putting in windows and doors in the spring. We laid out the area for the greenhouse as we intended to eventually add on more greenhouse space. We were thinking about 40 to 50 feet of greenhouse would be ideal for about 8 to 10 families, which is what we figured we could comfortably fit on our property for the amount of land that we wanted to develop. We would also develop a community garden, and we had 9 stalls in the barn. We would be taking a few stalls out to store equipment, but we would still have plenty of stalls. The first summer on the farm, we had pumpkins, purple broccoli, cabbage, tomatoes, chives, and a few other things. Our focus was getting the trees planted so they could get established. Next year, we would develop a community garden where we could expand on our seasonal growing. We had already bought citrus trees and some fruit trees with us to the farm to plant and intended to keep the citrus trees in the greenhouse while we are working on outside projects, which we will cover in future episodes. As we began covering the greenhouse, winter was quickly approaching, and we needed to finish quickly to get through the winter. Unfortunately, after completing the greenhouse, we were hit with storms that came through the area, and it had gone through multiple states. As the winds continued, it ruined the covering of the greenhouse.
Our poor little greenhouse did not get affected by the storm that came through 5 states. In fact, we were fine. And then a day or so afterwards, it was like the leftover wind. It had ripped the greenhouse tarp, and once it did that, the wind just whipped through it and destroyed the rest of it. So we lost the cover on our greenhouse. So we are now growing inside the house, which I will show you. And I've got quite a few plants growing in there. So we'll have to figure that out. And as you can see, the barn is actually bigger than it looks. I will get into showing you the inside of that as well. But this is the area that we have fenced in. This is all along here is what we'd like to do to put the road. And we have a U driveway in the front. And we would eventually like to put a covered porch on the back of our home. And I've got some trees that I've put in the ground. Some of them are little babies, but they are all edible sources of food in one form or another. So they will be doing a lot of growing this year. And some of our larger trees will be producing fruit this year. And there's a neighbor. This is kind of the view you have in the front. But it's a dead-end road, so there's only, I think, 4 people after us. That's it. And we just had some wood delivered for the season, so we have to stack that, clean it up, cover it, etc. So we do have some cleaning up to do. It will not always look like this. It's a work in progress.
We also saw a gust of wind that ripped through our cedar tree next to the greenhouse and knocked over one of the main branches of the tree. We lost some plants, and now we had returned to just a frame. We lost the investment of our greenhouse covering. We would need to revisit the idea of a greenhouse, as even being in the foothills means strong winds. We learned that in this area, a tarp is not practical, and we really need a commercial strength greenhouse if we were to make it work. This meant that I would have to bring in all the plants that survived from the greenhouse into the house and keep them through the rest of the winter. It was a lesson learned, and now we have a frame that just may end up serving another purpose on the farm. Ideally, a geothermal attached greenhouse to our home would provide what we need and save on separate heating for the greenhouse. Geothermal designs actually help with heating the home as well. All through the winter, we heated our home with a wood stove and rather enjoyed gathering around the stove and watching the dancing of the flames. Also, the stove acts as a stovetop where you can even cook. Again, it was considering our desire to go off-grid. In the next episode, we will shift gears and give you an update on the inside progress of our home.